The wind blew hard that night, carrying dry leaves along the dirt road that cut through the fields. Claire clutched her thin coat tightly around her body, walking home from her night shift at the diner. The dim light from her phone barely lit. The way and the silence of the early morning was broken only by her hurried steps. Then she heard it, a moan, weak and dragging, coming from the side of the road. Her heart raced. She stopped, heard it again, and ran toward the sound. Among the bushes and mud there was a man lying down, semi-conscious. His white shirt stained with blood and his torn blazer made it clear something serious had happened. Claire knelt without hesitation, feeling the cold of the ground seep into her skin. "Hey, sir, can you hear me?" she said, her voice steady, though her heart was in despair. He tried to open his eyes but only mumbled something unintelligible. Without thinking twice, Claire took off her scarf and pressed it against the cut on his shoulder. She called emergency services with trembling hands, describing the location with precision. While she waited, she tried to keep the man awake, speaking softly, urging him to hold on. His face, though injured, looked strangely familiar. Or maybe it was just the oddity of the moment. She didn't know who he was, only that she had to save him. The ambulance arrived minutes later, breaking the darkness with flashing red lights. The paramedics moved fast, impressed by the first aid Claire had administered. "Do you know him?" one of them asked. She shook her head. "I just knew I couldn't leave him there." They thanked her and invited her to go along. But she declined. She'd already done her part. The next day, Claire went back to work as if nothing had happened. She washed dishes and took orders with the same gentle smile as always. But inside, she couldn't stop thinking about the man from the night before. Who was he? What was he doing there, alone and wounded, on a road forgotten by everyone? It was as if that encounter had changed something inside her, without her knowing why. That same afternoon, the story made it to the local news. Mysterious man found injured near Blackwood Hill. But what caught everyone's attention was the identity revealed. Alexander Reed, CEO of one of the largest investment firms in the country, reclusive resident of the mansion atop the hill, the same one Claire saw in the distance every day. She widened her eyes when she read the headline on the crumpled newspaper old George left on the counter. "Did you see this, Claire? That weird rich guy. Almost died, huh?" She masked her shock with a brief smile. No one knew she was the one who had found him, and she had no intention of telling. Something in her preferred to keep it secret. For now. Rumors spread through the small town like wildfire. Some said it was an attempted robbery. Others claimed he had tried to end his own life. Claire didn't know which version to believe, but she knew what she had seen. Fear in his eyes, and a loneliness that went beyond physical injury. It was the kind of pain she knew too well. Life went on, the way it always does for the invisible. Claire cleaned tables, washed uniforms, and cared for her sick grandmother in the back of a rented house. But now, every time she passed the curve, in the road she looked toward the brush with a chill down her spine. And every time she saw the silhouette of the mansion against the orange sky, she felt something stir in her chest, as if a story were about to begin, and she was already in the middle of it. 3 days later, when the bell above the diner door rang, Claire didn't even look up. She was busy organizing the silverware. It was only when the whole room fell silent that she realized something was off. She lifted her eyes and saw him. Alexander Reed was standing there, looking straight at her. The tailored suit hid the bandages, but the eyes were the same, wary, intense, unsettled. Claire froze for a second, trying to understand what he was doing there. He walked toward her, slowly, like someone who didn't know what to say. "You're Claire, right?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. She nodded, unsure whether she should speak or run. "You were the one who found me that night, weren't you?" She hesitated, then with a small smile answered, "I just did what anyone would do." He gave a dry laugh. Anyone else would have walked right past. Claire didn't know why, but the way he said it hurt more than it should have. "I wanted to thank you. In person," he said, pulling a small envelope from his pocket. She looked at it confused. What's that? A thank you for what you did. She crossed her arms, her smile fading. If it's money, you can keep it. I didn't do it for a reward. Alexander looked surprised. No one ever refused his money. But Claire wasn't like the people he was used to dealing with. There, in a stained apron and with firm eyes, she seemed more unreachable than any socialite. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to say. He just put the envelope back without insisting. The silence between them was strange. Not uncomfortable, but full of something neither could name. He thanked her again and left, leaving only the doorbell behind and a trail of confusion in the air. Claire stood still, as if something inside her had shifted. Something she didn't yet understand, but couldn't ignore. In the days that followed, she tried to forget, but he kept coming back, to the diner, to the road, to her thoughts. Always with strange questions, deep glances, and a presence that stirred everything up. It was as if his world, shielded, distant, wealthy, was slowly invading hers, and she didn't know whether to let him in or shut him out in time. Back at the mansion, Alexander stared out the window, lost in memories that hurt. Why did that woman unsettle him so much? She didn't want anything from him, and maybe that's what touched him most. In that forgotten, little town, he finally felt seen, and that was terrifying. Claire, meanwhile, swept the kitchen floor like she did every day. But now, every detail felt different. The sound of the street, the smell of coffee, the reflection in the glass. As if the world was about to turn a page, and she held her heart in her hands, ready to read or tear it all apart. Two opposite lives, two hidden wounds, an unexpected and silent encounter. But fate had already begun writing its own story, letter by letter, and neither Alexander nor Claire had any idea where it would lead them. They only knew something had changed, forever. And in the distance, the mansion glowed beneath the night sky, imposing, lonely, waiting for someone to finally turn the lights on inside. Maybe someone like her. Maybe a heart like his. Alexander's visit became the talk of the town within hours. Some said he was interested in buying the diner. Others swore there was something going on between him and Claire, a theory she met with silence. But inside, her heart echoed with unanswered questions. Why did he keep coming back? And why did she care so much? The next morning, Claire walked through the narrow streets carrying a basket of groceries for her grandmother. She tried to ignore the curious stares and the neighbors' knowing smirks. She was used to being invisible, and now she hated being the center of attention. She passed the school where she once studied, the square where she used to play, and the church where her mother used to sing. Everything suddenly felt too small, until he showed up. Alexander, on the other hand, faced the world with the cold detachment of someone who had seen too much. In the makeshift office of his mansion, he stared at the computer screen without really reading anything. Claire's face kept appearing between graphs and numbers, persistent, disarming. She had saved him, but it was more than that. There was something about that woman, something he couldn't explain. He decided to look for her again, this time with a different excuse. He wanted to donate to the local nursing home where her grandmother received care. Claire was suspicious, but didn't reject the offer. As long as your name's not involved. The old folks here hate millionaires. Alexander smiled for the first time in days. And you? She looked him straight in the eye. I don't hate the rich, I just don't worship them. He blinked, surprised by her bluntness. It was like she'd pierced the armor he wore in his gaze. And for the first time, Alexander felt like talking, really talking. Not about business, but about her. The invitation for coffee came out awkwardly. Claire hesitated. Not out of fear, but pride. But something in her told her that man needed company more than she needed the coffee. They sat in the corner of the empty diner, surrounded by mugs and half-told stories, and the silence between them began to feel comfortable. Alexander spoke little, Claire even less, but their eyes said what their words couldn't. He told her he lost his sister in an accident 3 years ago and hadn't been the same since. She told him her mother had died due to medical negligence, and she never trusted anyone again. 2 different traumas, 2 open wounds, but the same lonely pain. "Have you ever thought about leaving this place?" he asked, watching her hands. "I have, but my grandmother has Alzheimer's, and I promised she wouldn't be alone." Alexander went quiet, moved. In his world, promises were negotiable, but here, they were sacred. Claire was made of something else, and he knew it. In the following days, their closeness became an unexpected routine. Short conversations, anonymous donations, glances that lasted too long. Claire still had doubts but her smile started to change, and Alexander stopped hiding so much. The world around him began to regain color, but everything was about to change. One rainy afternoon, Claire received a strange call. A reporter from a gossip magazine was asking about her secret romance with Mr. Reed. She hung up immediately, embarrassed and furious. What had he done? She walked to the mansion with her head held high and firm steps. He opened the door himself, surprised to see her. "You exposed my life, Alexander. I may be poor, but I have dignity." He tried to explain, but she was hurt. And when Claire was hurt, she built walls. "I didn't tell anyone anything, but it seems you forgot who I am." Her eyes were teary, but her posture stayed strong. "I'm just the girl from the diner, Eliza's granddaughter, the one who saved you, and asked for nothing in return." Alexander felt those words hit his chest like a punch. He had never felt so small. She turned to leave, but he gently held her arm. "You're not just that, Claire, and that's exactly what scares me." She paused, but didn't look back. "Then deal with your fear, because I'm not your redemption project." And she left, her steps shaky, her heart shattered. That night, Alexander sat on the library floor. He stared at shelves full of books he never read, at paintings he no longer felt, and realized that all of it, money, power, influence, meant nothing compared to the look she denied him. Claire was the only real thing he'd touched in years, and now, he had lost her. Claire, meanwhile, cried into the old pillow in her childhood bedroom. She knew she shouldn't get attached, that men like him didn't stay, but it still hurt, because for a brief moment, she believed she could be seen and loved without having to change. Life in town returned to its usual rhythm, but with a quiet tension between the two. He didn't go back to the diner. She avoided the hilltop road. But they both knew this was just an intermission, like a pause between chapters in a book. Something still needed to be said. And as always, fate was preparing its next move. A silent threat was rising behind the scenes, an old ex-fiancé of Alexander, and she didn't like seeing her name off the headlines, especially because of an ordinary woman. Claire was about to face something far bigger than she imagined. Meanwhile, Alexander had a decision to make: protect his reputation or chase after the only woman who made him feel again. There was no more middle ground. He would either face his fears or lose her forever. And deep down, he already knew what his choice would be, even if it cost him everything. In the solitude of the night, he grabbed his car keys and drove down the hill. He needed to see her, needed to apologize, not with flowers, not with promises, but with the truth, for the first time in years. With his heart wide open, and Claire, sitting quietly in the dark of the porch, felt something approaching. It wasn't fear, it wasn't hope. It was that strange feeling that this time, he'd come back different. Because sometimes, you have to lose everything to finally begin. The night was silent when Alexander's car stopped in front of Claire's modest home. He stepped out slowly, as if the ground might collapse beneath his feet. He brought nothing in his hands, just a bare heart, with no rehearsed apologies. He knocked on the door with hesitation, once, twice, and when it opened, it was her grandmother who greeted him. "Good evening, handsome," said Donna Eliza, smiling with distant eyes. Alexander gave a slight nod, unsure of how to respond. "Is Claire home?" "She's always here, even when she wants to disappear." He understood. She knew more than she let on. Claire appeared moments later, hair tied back, eyes tired. She said nothing. Neither did he. They just looked at each other for long seconds, as if the silence held everything they were afraid to say. "May I come in?" he asked. She hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. They sat in the small living room, surrounded by old photographs and a teapot in the corner. Alexander took in every detail as if trying to memorize the space she called home. Claire crossed her arms, guarded. "Came to give me another rehearsed explanation?" "No, I came to listen." She raised an eyebrow. "Listen? Did one of your advisors tell you that looks good in the press?" He sighed, eyes honest. "I didn't ask for the article, but I didn't stop it either, and I should have." Claire looked away. The hurt still burned. "I've seen too many people pretend to care, and I've seen too many walk away from me." Alexander didn't speak easily. Words felt like heavy stones in his throat. But with her, he had to try. "You're the only person who's treated me like a normal human being in years." She held her breath. "And does that bother you? Or set you free?" she asked, meeting his eyes. "It scares me, but I think it sets me free." Claire closed her eyes for a moment. In that instant, something softened inside her. Not enough to forget, but maybe enough to listen. "Then, talk. But only the truth," Alexander told her. About his sister who died in a boating accident, about the guilt he carried for not being there, about the greedy ex-fiancé who left a week later, taking half his fortune, about the isolation he chose as punishment, and about how, when he saw Claire that night, something inside him began to breathe again. Claire listened in silence. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze remained steady. When he finished, she simply said, "You need to understand that pain doesn't give you the right to hurt others." He nodded. "I know. That's why I'm here." For a moment, silence returned. Then she stood and said, "I'll make some tea. It's a cold night." It was her way of saying, "I'm still here," and he understood, without rushing. While the water boiled in the kitchen, Claire leaned against the counter. Her chest tightened, not from what he said, but from what she felt and tried to hide. Alexander stirred everything she had worked so hard to control. Part of her wanted to hate him for that, but another part wanted to believe. They returned to the living room, tea in hand. They drank in silence, sharing an old, uncomfortable armchair. There were no touches, no promises, just presence. And sometimes that's more intimate than a kiss. She felt it. So did he. "Are you leaving tomorrow?" she asked, almost unintentionally. "If you want me to stay, I will." Claire looked at him seriously. "Don't say that if it's not true." "It is. For the first time, it is." Outside, the rain began to fall gently. Inside, time felt suspended. Alexander wanted to touch her but didn't. Claire wanted to believe him but couldn't, not yet. There were too many ghosts between them. Before leaving, he stopped at the door. "If you let me try, I want to do this right." Claire remained silent, then replied softly, "Then start by being someone I can respect." He nodded, understanding, more than her words. It wasn't about flowers or fancy dinners, it was about coherence, about stripping away pride, about being a real man, not a CEO, not a millionaire. Just someone whole. In the days that followed, Alexander began showing up in unexpected places. At the farmer's market, the nursing home, helping fix a neighbor's fence, not to impress Claire, but to be part of her world. People started to see him differently, and so did she. But peace didn't last. His ex-fiancée, Vanessa, returned to town with a venomous smile and threats of scandal. She couldn't stand losing, especially to a girl from the neighborhood. Claire was her next target, and Alexander had to protect what was barely beginning. That night, as Claire walked home alone from the diner, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, alarmed. Vanessa was there in an expensive dress and cold eyes. "You really think you can take my place?" she sneered. Claire said nothing, but her posture spoke. "I don't want your place. I have my own." And there, under the dim streetlight and a veiled threat in the air, the war between two worlds had finally begun. But Claire wasn't the type to run. She would face it all. For herself, for her truth, and maybe for a love that was just beginning. Claire came home with her heart racing. It wasn't fear. It was indignation, wounded pride, and something harder to name: a warning. Vanessa didn't seem like just any ex. She spoke as if she still believed Alexander was hers. And Claire, even while trying to stay grounded, felt there was much more behind that threat. But she wouldn't let anyone diminish her. The next morning, Alexander showed up with a simple bouquet and a worried expression. "She came to you?" was the first thing he asked. Claire nodded. "On the street, late at night." His eyes shut with restrained anger. "I should have known. Vanessa doesn't accept losing, not even what's no longer hers." "She talked about scandals," Claire said, locking eyes with him. Alexander sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "She knows the ghosts of my family and how to use them against me. And against me too?" He hesitated. "If necessary, she'll use you as bait." Claire went silent for a moment. Then she stood slowly and said, "Then you have a choice. Face what haunts you or push me away." Alexander looked at her as if something inside him had broken. "I'll never leave you in the dark again." The city began whispering again. This time it wasn't just gossip. It was heavy insinuations, sensational headlines, and unauthorized photos. Claire appeared next to Alexander in manipulated reports. They called her a gold digger, opportunist, or schemer, and she felt the shame rise like fire. At the nursing home, the looks were different. Some patients avoided her, others looked on with pity. But the worst was seeing her grandmother being shielded from cruel comments. Claire clenched her fists, took a deep breath, and decided, if they're going to talk about me, they'll hear my truth. She accepted the invitation to a live interview on the local radio. She arrived with her hair down, her voice steady, and her eyes calm. "I'm not a hero, but I'm not a villain either," she said, when asked about her relationship with Alexander Reed. She spoke about her simple life, her late mother, hard work, and dignity, and ended with a sentence that shook the town. "I didn't choose him for his money. He chose to love me despite who I am." Alexander listened to the interview in silence, sitting in his car. With each word, the knot in his throat tightened. She was being stronger than he had ever been in his life, and that made him decide it was time to tear up the contracts with the past. The next day, he called a press conference. Vanessa tried to stop him, threatened, cried, but he ignored her. In front of reporters, he said, "For years I hid behind walls and masks. Today I choose to live for real." And for the first time, he publicly declared, "Claire saved my life and my soul." The video went viral. Social media split between support and hate, as always. But in town, something shifted. People began to look at Claire with respect, not because of fame, but because of the courage to face everything without lowering her eyes. That night, Alexander went to her house without warning. Claire received him on the porch where the yellow streetlight cast soft shadows. "You spoke about me in public. I spoke about us." She smiled faintly, but there was still a wall between them. "There's something you need to know," he said, looking at her with pain in his eyes. "3 years ago, my family held shares in the clinic where your mother was treated." Claire froze. The world seemed to fall apart beneath her. "You knew?" Alexander nodded, slowly. "I found out recently, when I heard your last name and looked into it." Claire stepped back. The porch floor seemed to tremble. "You knew, and you said nothing." He tried to approach, but she raised her hand. "Don't touch me right now." Her voice was low but full of pain. "Do you understand what that means?" "It means I'm part of what hurt you, and that destroys me." Alexander stood there, stripped of everything, except the truth. Claire went inside and gently closed the door. She didn't slam it, didn't scream, but cried like she hadn't in a long time. The wound reopened, deep, raw, exposed. She didn't know if she could ever trust again. And he didn't know if he could fix it. On the other side of the door, Alexander stayed for minutes that felt like hours. Then he left a carefully folded letter on the doormat. Inside, there were no excuses, only a plea. "If one day you can forgive me, I'll be where it all began." And an old key to the boathouse where his sister had died. Claire spent the following days in silence. She went to work, cared for her grandmother, and avoided thinking. But everything inside her cried out for an answer. Not for him, for herself. Because maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about choosing to move on. On Friday night, she walked alone to the hidden lake behind the hill. The boathouse was still there, silent, soaked in memories. Alexander waited, sitting on the wooden steps, his eyes tired. When he saw her, he stood up, but said nothing. He waited, like someone who knows love can't be demanded. It must be earned. Claire walked slowly toward him. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now. I'll wait," he said without hesitation. She took a deep breath and sat beside him. "But maybe the beginning is listening again." And there, under the stars reflected in the calm water, two wounded hearts took a timid step toward something new. No promises, no guarantees, just presence. Because sometimes true love doesn't start with "I love you," but with "I'm here despite everything." The boathouse had become a quiet refuge. Claire and Alexander spent hours there, side by side, without many words. It was as if the space between them was being rebuilt carefully, brick by brick. She still felt pain, and he still carried guilt. But they were there, and that was already more than they had weeks ago. On Monday, Claire returned to her routine. She waited tables, washed glasses, cared for her grandmother, just like always. But something in her had shifted. Her gaze was calmer, as if she'd made peace with uncertainty. And for the first time, she didn't avoid looking at the mansion on the hill. She knew that inside, someone was trying to become a better man. Alexander, on the other hand, dove into the past with his eyes wide open. He requested access to the records from the old clinic and started an internal investigation. He wanted to know who had been responsible for the error that cost Claire's mother her life. He wasn't just seeking forgiveness. He was seeking justice and redemption. He discovered that one of the doctors involved was still practicing, protected by silent agreements, and that his own family back then helped cover up the scandal. The truth cut deep, but it needed to be exposed. Alexander held a press conference and announced he would fund a new community clinic. Free, open, and named after Grace Bennett, Claire's mother. Claire watched the conference from behind the diner counter. When she heard her mother's name spoken aloud, with respect and honor, her eyes filled with tears. Alexander spoke, with conviction without trying to look like a hero. "My family was wrong. Now I choose to do things differently." And for the first time, she felt she could begin to forgive. That night, he showed up on her porch with a folder in hand. "All the documents for the project, I want you to read them. Tell me what to change." Claire took the papers without a word, but her gaze was different. It was as if she had found a glimpse of trust. They spent the following days reviewing the project. She, firm and demanding. He, open and attentive. They debated schedules, accessibility, triage systems, and slowly, their meetings turned into more than work. They started laughing at silly things, exchanging long glances, sharing coffee, like two people who, without noticing, were building more than a clinic. The town, once hostile, began to see them differently, not as a scandal, but as an inspiration. The headlines changed tone, and Claire, who had once wished to go unnoticed, learned to exist with dignity, even under the spotlight, because she knew who she was, and no one could take that away. One day, while reviewing contracts, Alexander stopped writing and said, "If I'd met you earlier, maybe I'd be a different man." Claire looked at him sweetly. "And if I'd met you earlier, maybe I wouldn't have the courage to love you." They laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was true. The boathouse once again became their meeting place. Now with cushions on the floor, an old guitar resting in the corner, and the scent of tea in the air. One evening, Claire read him passages from her mother's journal. Alexander listened intently, with tears in his eyes. There, between memories and promises, the two of them were healing together. But peace didn't last. Vanessa returned, this time with a lawyer. She wanted to sue Alexander for breach of verbal contract and emotional damages. And more than anything, she wanted to destroy Claire in the process. The battle was far from over. Alexander, however, didn't hide. He refused settlements, faced the accusations, and exposed Vanessa's true intentions on national television. He took responsibility for his past mistakes and defended Claire fiercely. "She is my truth in a world full of lies," he declared firmly. And this time, no one doubted it. Claire followed everything from a distance, not out of weakness, but by choice. She knew there were battles he needed to face on his own, and this was one of them. But deep down, she hoped he'd come back whole, because she still wanted him whole. After the trial, Alexander returned to the boathouse. Claire was already waiting, sitting on the wooden steps with a calm smile. "Did you win?" she asked. "I lost money, contracts, partners. But I found peace." She nodded, emotional. "Then you won what mattered most." He sat beside her quietly. Then he pulled a small box from his pocket. But when he opened it, there was no ring, only a letter, with the words, "I don't want to promise the world. I just want to offer you mine." Claire read it slowly, feeling every line like a warm embrace. When she finished, she looked at him tenderly. "And I want to offer you mine too." Alexander smiled, unhurried. And in that moment, the distance between them finally vanished. There were no fireworks, no crowd, just a gentle, honest kiss and full of meaning. Two scarred hearts saying yes to imperfection and to the possibility of real love, the kind that begins in pain, but blooms in truth. The next morning, the town woke up different. At the entrance of the new medical center, a sign gleamed, "Grace Bennett Center, because every life deserves to be cared for." And among the volunteers were Claire and Alexander, hand in hand, with purpose. The headlines now told a different story, that of the millionaire who chose to love for real, of the ordinary woman who changed an entire destiny with courage and integrity, and of how together they built more than a romance, when they built a legacy, something time could never erase. And at night, beneath the same sky that once witnessed their first encounter, Claire and Alexander returned to the boathouse. No masks, no fears, just two hearts that now knew. Sometimes true love lives right next door. The Grace Bennett Center opened its doors on a sunny Saturday morning. The streets were decorated with wildflowers donated by the townspeople. Claire cut the ribbon with trembling hands, surrounded by proud gazes. Alexander stood by her side, discreet, respecting her moment in the spotlight. In that simple gesture was the closing of a chapter of pain and the beginning of many new starts. The first appointments were filled with silence and gratitude. Elderly folks, mothers with children, people who had only dreamed of access to proper care. Claire organized files, served tea, and helped with genuine smiles. Alexander, always nearby, oversaw the structure and watched everything with eyes like a boy rediscovering the world. There was no luxury there, but there was love. One night, after a long day of appointments, Claire and Alexander stayed late to clean the front desk. She scrubbed the floor while he wiped down counters, a CEO in gloves with a bucket. "You're learning fast," she said, laughing. "That's because my teacher is tough," he replied, smiling with his eyes. In that moment, they were just two people, equal, happy. But the past has a way of returning with unexpected force. One day, a stranger showed up at the center asking to speak with Claire. She recognized him instantly, the former director of the clinic where her mother died. "What are you doing here?" she asked, freezing. "I came to ask for forgiveness and to tell you the truth." Alexander arrived just in time to hear part of the conversation. The man confessed that Grace Bennett had died because they refused to operate without immediate payment. His voice trembled with shame. Claire listened, eyes full of tears but her posture strong. "Thank you for telling me. Now carry that guilt with you." After he left, Claire stepped outside for air. Alexander followed, concerned. "Are you okay?" She nodded, eyes lost in the sky. "Today, for the first time, I felt like my mother finally found peace." The days that followed were calm and full of purpose. Alexander sold properties, ended old contracts, let go of things that no longer made sense. He wanted to start over from scratch, with Claire. But a question grew inside her. Could he really live outside the world he once knew? One night at the boathouse, she asked him, "Are you ready to give all this up for an ordinary life?" Alexander looked at her with tenderness and replied, "It's not ordinary. It's the life that has you in it." Then he handed her a notebook. Inside were sketches of a new home. Nothing grand, just a porch with a hammock, a kitchen full of windows, and a garden of lavender. "I want to build this, not just the place, but the life inside it." Claire closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight and the lightness yet of that promise. "Then let's start with the foundation, and with time." But something unexpected struck them. Claire's grandmother's health suddenly worsened, and she was hospitalized. Claire dropped everything to stay by her side, reliving old fears. Alexander remained present, preparing meals, managing medications, and taking care of Claire. They had never been so close, or so vulnerable. Even in confusion, Donna Eliza smiled when she saw Alexander. You're the boy from the rain," she said, mistaking him for her late husband. Claire was moved by her grandmother's tenderness and by his patience. "If she sees my grandfather in you, then you're doing great." Alexander smiled. But deep down, he feared losing them. On Eliza's final night, the room was quiet. Claire held her hand, while Alexander watched from the door. "You were my greatest love," her grandmother whispered before she passed. Claire cried in silence without screams, because she knew that true love never dies. The funeral was simple, with field flowers and words of hope. Alexander stood by Claire the entire time without forcing words. Grief bonded them in a deep, quiet way. And in that absence, something even stronger was born. Permanence. They knew love had to endure even loss. After the loss, Claire withdrew for a few days. She needed to hear her own silence, to sort through what she felt. Alexander respected that. He simply left one letter each day with short, honest lines. "I'm here, and I'll still be here, even if you don't answer." She came home with puffy eyes and hands full of letters. She kept each one like someone collecting seashells after a storm. And on a cold morning after reading the last one, she replied with a letter of her own. I'm still here too. Still broken, but whole enough to keep going, he cried when he read it. The following week, Claire returned to the Grace Bennett Center. She was welcomed with hugs, flowers, and respect. Alexander waited for her on the porch, wearing the reserved smile she knew so well. You came back. I told you I just needed time, not distance. That night, they danced in the center's garden, beneath hanging lights and music from an old speaker. No audience, no cameras. Just the two of them, awkward steps and real laughter. Alexander held her like she was his first and last chance at love. And Claire finally let herself be loved without fear. At the end of the dance, he held her hands tightly. You still don't want rings, and I understand. She nodded, emotional. But if someday you do, I'll be waiting. With a house, a hammock, and lavender. Claire laughed through her tears. Then plant the lavender and water it with patience. It was a silent pact, a love that didn't need to rush, only to take root. And even without a set date, they both knew they were on the path. Love was no longer a promise, it was practice, and it would grow day by day like the flowers in their yard. At the boathouse, now renovated and full of life, Claire wrote in a new journal, while Alexander played guitar clumsily. They weren't perfect, but they were real. And in the reflection of the water, their story took on the shape of something eternal. Because some encounters aren't chance, they're destiny. Spring arrived in Blackwood Hill, carrying flowers and quiet promises. The Grace Bennett Center bloomed alongside its garden, now full of lavender, just as Claire had dreamed. Alexander walked lighter, as if he'd shed his old armor. Claire remained grounded, her heart still under construction. Together, they were learning that love also meant choosing to stay. One warm afternoon, Claire received an unusual proposal. The mayor's office wanted to honor her for her social contributions to the town. She hesitated. She'd always preferred the background over the spotlight. But Alexander encouraged her with simple words. You deserve to be recognized, and I'll be in the front row. On the day of the ceremony, Claire wore a light blue dress her mother had sewn years ago. It was simple, delicate, and full of meaning. Alexander, in a gray suit and loose tie, looked at her as if no one else existed. The town applauded, and for a few seconds, Claire allowed herself to shine, not out of vanity, but because she had earned it. That same evening, after the applause and speeches, they went to the boathouse. Everything remained as it was the first day they met again, after the truth was revealed. But now, the silence between them was different, the kind that comes from knowing you belong. Claire sat on the steps, gazing at the moon, reflecting on the lake. Alexander knelt beside her, saying nothing. I don't have a ring. Or perfect words, he said, voice low. She looked at him, surprised but calm. That's okay. We already have the essence. He smiled, relieved. And together they simply pressed their foreheads together. A silent promise. The next morning they found a letter in the clinic's mailbox. It was from Vanessa. No threats, no accusations, just a single phrase written with bitter resignation. You won. I hope it's worth it. Claire read the letter and sighed. Alexander simply tore it up. No anger, just closure. She's no longer part of our story, he said. But she taught us to protect our truth better, Claire replied. And they moved on, and without hate but with clarity. The new house began to take shape. Alexander made sure to follow every detail, even if he didn't understand construction. Claire chose the colors, fabrics, and plants with a care that felt almost maternal. It wasn't just a physical structure. It was symbolic. A new life was being built. One weekend, they visited the grave of Alexander's sister. Claire held his hand the entire time, letting him lead the silence. He knelt by the stone and whispered, It took me a while, but I finally found peace. Claire laid a flower and said, And I think she's smiling now. On the way back, they stopped in a small village and entered a quaint bookstore. Claire bought a book of old poetry. Alexander picked up a blue-covered notebook. "What's that for?" she asked, laughing. "To write about you," he replied, simple and sincere. Their evenings became rituals of tenderness. They cooked together, danced to old music, and laughed at Alexander's disastrous culinary attempts. Claire collected moments like rare seashells. Alexander watched her, amazed to be allowed to exist beside her, and in between laughter and silence they built love, slowly, gently. One day, Claire received an unexpected call. A major national newspaper wanted to do a story on her and Alexander. She declined without hesitation. "Our story is for those who lived it, and for those who respect it." Alexander supported her decision, pride in his eyes. Still, social media kept spreading versions of their story. Some true, others distorted. But now none of it shook them. Because what mattered wasn't what others said, but what they truly knew about each other. On a rainy afternoon, Claire ran into an old teacher. He hugged her and said, "You were always different. You just needed the right time to bloom." She smiled, emotional, because now she finally believed it. And she no longer had anything to prove. The Grace Bennett Center expanded its services. Other cities began studying its model of care and compassion. Claire became a reference, even without seeking it. Alexander stayed in the background, discreet but ever present, and their love was the invisible foundation of it all. One day, as they watched the sunset from the porch of their new home, Claire asked, "Do you ever miss your old world?" Alexander paused, then said, "I miss who I was, because now I finally know who I am." She smiled and embraced him without a word. The next night, a storm rolled over the town. They lit candles, made hot chocolate, and sat on the floor in silence. Claire recited verses from her poetry book. Alexander, eyes glistening, said, "That poem, it's about you." And even with the wind howling outside, the house felt strong, alive, safe, because it wasn't made only of bricks. It was built from choices, scars, and faith. Faith that love, even imperfect, could be eternal. Before bed, Claire wrote a sentence in his blue notebook. "We weren't saved by luck. We were saved by courage." Alexander read it and kissed her forehead. "Thank you for teaching me how to love." And she whispered, "Thank you for staying." And as the world slept, two once lonely hearts beat in harmony. Because some stories don't need dramatic endings. They just need to keep going. Steady. After the storm, in the quiet of a lavender-filled home with love that remains, time passed slowly, the way it should when life is built with presence. The lavender house bloomed around them, filled with little details that told their story. On the porch, 2 rocking chairs. On the shelf, the blue notebook full of notes and poems. Life wasn't perfect, but it was full. And between smiles and silences, their love grew more mature. One morning, Claire woke up to the smell of coffee from the kitchen. Alexander was singing off-key, trying to follow the recipe she'd left on a note. She watched him from a distance, laughing to herself. It was in moments like these that love revealed itself most, not through promises, but in daily acts, in being there, even when no one was watching. Later, they sat together under the tree in the backyard with an old box between them. It held what was left of Claire's mother's memories, letters, photos, a voice recording. Alexander listened to every word, with reverence. And when Claire cried, he didn't try to console her. He just held her. Because he had learned that sometimes love simply stays. That week, they received an invitation to speak at a university. They wanted them to share how they built the community center. Claire declined at first. "We're not examples." But Alexander replied, "That's exactly why we're real." They took the stage holding hands, nerves in their eyes, truth in their voices. Claire talked about the night she found a stranger on the road. Alexander spoke of loss and the fear of loving again, and together they shared the power of starting over with someone who truly sees you. The audience gave a standing ovation. When they got home, they found a letter in the clinic's mailbox in a child's handwriting. "Thank you for helping my mom at the center. She doesn't cry when she gets home anymore." Claire read it with tearful eyes. Alexander stuck it on the fridge between recipes and reminders, because that, right there, was the real impact of what they had built together. Months later, Alexander planned a surprise. There was no ring, no camera flashes, just a new hammock on the porch, a table set, and a simple note. "Do you want to keep choosing me every day?" Claire replied with a long kiss without a word. They never set a date. Their union was made gradually, in how they washed dishes together or tended the garden. Their bond was in how he covered her at night, even when she was already asleep, or how she always left a note in his lunch. They didn't need a ceremony. They were already living the vow. In town, they were known as the couple from Lavender Hill. Children ran to them for advice or candy. Elderly folks invited them to dances in the square. And Claire, who once hid in the shadows, now became a light for others. She finally allowed herself to be seen and loved. One autumn afternoon, they sat on the bench facing the lake. Alexander brought a new blue notebook and asked her to write the first page. Claire thought, smiled, and wrote, "Love is when someone stays, even when leaving would be easier." And he replied, "Then I promise to keep staying." Life went on with its ups and downs, but they learned not to run from hardship. They argued, fell silent, and then talked again. They learned to say sorry, to listen, to grow together. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was braver than that. It was a real story, built on daily choices. Alexander sold his last company and fully dedicated himself to the community project. He learned to work as a team, to be led, to fail without shame. Claire started writing articles on emotional health and social impact. She didn't publish often, but when she did, her words quietly touched hearts, and people listened. Years later, during lunch under the tree, a little girl from the center called them Mr. and Mrs. Hart. Claire laughed, moved. Alexander pretended not to melt, but his eyes sparkled. Maybe that really was their legacy, to care for hearts, especially their own, the house filled with photos, books, plants, and stories. Friends came and went, but the love between them was an anchor. On cold nights, they read together. On warm days, they walked hand in hand along the hillside trails. There was nothing grand, but there was everything that mattered. One day, Claire wrote in her journal, "If I could speak to the girl who waited tables and came home scared, I'd say, wait, because the right kind of love comes slowly, but it comes whole." She closed the notebook with a smile. Alexander, unaware of what she'd written, hugged her from behind, and she knew it was here. It was him. On a symbolic anniversary of the clinic, they gave a speech together. Alexander thanked her for finding him on the side of the road. Claire thanked him for choosing to stay. The entire town stood and clapped. But they both knew what truly mattered was what they lived when the lights went out. At the end of that day, they returned home with lavender swaying in the breeze. Claire lay in the hammock, her head resting on his lap. "Are you still afraid of love?" she asked. Alexander looked at the sky and smiled. "No, because now I know love is what remains after fear." That night, the last page of the blue notebook was filled. In Alexander's messy handwriting, it read, "I was just a broken man. You were shelter. And today, we are home." Claire cried quietly, moved, and he held her, the way he always did. On the porch, the light glowed, softly, more than just lighting the space. It illuminated the certainty that even through all the pain, they had chosen something rare, a real love, a conscious love, a steady love. And far away, the old mansion stood empty, because now his heart lived elsewhere. And so, among lavender, notebooks and silences full of truth, Claire and Alexander kept writing their story. Not perfect, but whole. Because when two souls decide to stay, love becomes eternal, even if no one sees. Years went by, but that love never faded. The Lavender House remained strong atop the hill, a silent symbol of everything they had faced and overcome. Inside, there wasn't a fairy tale, but something even rarer, a real love, imperfect and unbreakable. Claire kept writing about hope. Alexander, now a mentor to young social entrepreneurs, taught that true success begins when the heart finds purpose. And every evening they met on the same porch where, long ago, it all began with a silence full of pain, now filled with peace. On a golden afternoon, with the scent of lavender in the air, Alexander held Claire's hand, a hand marked by so many chapters of life, and said, "If I ever had to start over, I'd want it to be with you again, on that dark road, because that's where I was born again." She smiled, eyes brimming with tears, and replied, "And I would find you again, even without knowing who you were. Because when love is real, it always finds the way." And so, this story ends. Not with empty promises, but with the bravest choice of all, to stay. If this story touched your heart, leave a like. It helps this love reach more people. Comment below, do you believe love still exists? The kind that stays even after the storms? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in love again. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because here, every story is made to move, inspire, and remind you of what truly matters. And remember, you deserve a love that sees who you are and still chooses to stay.